Did you vote? Did you provide ID when you did so? You don't have to. Did you enrol if you're younger or you're a New Zealander? Did you provide ID when you do so? You don't have to. I would love your feedback on this issue around whether or not ID should be required to vote and or enrol. Text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Now, this issue is considered in the inquiry by a parliamentary committee after each election, and it's seen as a bit of a balancing act between guarding against electoral fraud or the possibility of it and not putting potential voters off by creating impediments to their participation. The final election results, of course, and the impact of the 380,000 special votes will be revealed tomorrow, and we wanted to talk to the Electoral Commission about all of this, but they simply declined an interview. We wanted to talk to Jackie Dean, the MP who was chair of the last committee, to consider electoral issues like this. Bizarrely, having initially said yes, we couldn't even get her office to call us back. But one man did contact us because he went to enrol and vote with his ID and was told they simply didn't need it. Oh, he thought. But then they got his details very wrong.
No, nothing was asked. I was just given a form to fill up.
So you filled out the form, you wrote your name down on it?
Yeah, when I went there, I went with my driver license and my passport, and I presented it to them, but they don't really need it, so they give me a form to fill up. So I just fill up the form by myself, with my name and everything.
Onikachi was voting for the first time as a New Zealander and enrolling to do so. No ID required. He was surprised by that. He'd brought ID with him, but he didn't dwell on it. New Zealand is different from Nigeria in lots of ways. And you then voted?
Yeah, I did it the same day. That was the first time.
Yeah, so your first time voting as a New Zealander. Congratulations. Then you receive a letter addressed to somebody who really doesn't have much in common with you at all, right?
Yeah, the letter I got to yesterday in the mailbox when I got home, and the name is totally different from my name.
This was an official confirmation of his enrolment as an elector, which arrived by mail. It was addressed to someone whose first name, well, resembles Onikachi's, and the date of birth is the same. But from that point on, it's alphabet soup.
Yeah, the spelling, everything was so wrong,
How wrong? Well, Onikachi's surname, for example, begins with the letters NWA. The person who'd been enrolled begins with the letters HIR. Is your name Omyikichi Bonyuti Hiranko?
No. It's totally wrong. It's a wrong name.
Quite wrong.
Yeah.
It's clearly human error, an inputting mistake or something. But Onikachi was struck by the fact that a person who doesn't actually exist is now enrolled to vote in New Zealand. Is that a system vulnerability? And he's not alone in wondering that.
Well, I must say I was also surprised because I went down there and I did have my early vote card, you know, the easy vote card. But actually I didn't get to bring it out because I just said Mei-Chen and they just went straight in, found my name, ruled it out and then called out the number and gave me the voting slip. And I must say I was surprised by that too. So I went and had a little look at it and it appears that no voter ID is actually required.
And remember, Mei-Chen's surprise was at being allowed to vote without ID. Onikachi also enrolled without ID. Now, Mei-Chen has mixed views on this. In her role as chair of the Super Diversity Centre, she thinks enfranchisement and participation are utterly critical, and any barriers to that are problematic. More on that in a moment. But on the other hand...
Well, I have to say that I think voting is so special. We only do it once every 3 years. And I think it's such an important right of citizenship, although in this country you can also do it if you're a permanent resident, that actually if you have to front up with ID when you go to a bar or a pub, I think you should be able to be required to front up with voter ID. I don't want somebody else taking my name and voting on my behalf. I don't want to be caught up in a situation where I'm contacted because somebody else has sought to try and vote under my name. I just think it's a problem that can be easily solved.
This was considered at some length by the inquiry into the 2014 general election conducted by the Justice and Electoral Committee, whose 45-page report contains a section on voter identification.
Several submissions called for more robust identification requirements when voters turn out to cast their ballot to prevent fraud and personation.
Personation is where an individual votes in an election pretending to be a different elector or votes again after having already cast their vote. Back to the report.
Some submitters suggested that photographic identification be required.
But the committee observed personation rates were very low and that acting against what has so far only been a tiny risk posed a potentially greater risk.
Requiring photographic identification from voters might result in some voters being turned away from voting, impose additional costs on voters and ultimately further reduce turnout.
And Mei Chen thinks that is a concern worth having. In short, that if photo ID is required,
then it actually has a chilling effect on voting.
Everyone acknowledges this is a balancing act. I phoned the Australian Electoral Commission. What do they require to enrol? Assistant Director Evan Eakin-Smythe replied by email.
If the person enrolling to vote is an Australian citizen by birth, then they have to provide either an Australian driver's licence number or Australian passport number as evidence of identity.
And if they're not a citizen by birth?
Then they have to provide their Australian citizenship number in addition to one of the forms of identity already listed.
That's Australia. In New Zealand, Onikachi, as you'll recall, had to provide no ID of any sort at all. And the formal report after last election found no evidence whatsoever of people abusing that kind of trust and problematic numbers. In other words, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I just want to be clear that it's not broken. I am concerned. We've got an increasing number of people coming to this country that don't come from democracies or don't come from real democracies. It is really important that we do make sure that our system cannot be rorted in any way.
So let's look at the numbers, and we'll take them from the Justice and Electoral Committee's report.
There has been an increase in referrals for personation from 63 in 2011 to 126 in 2014.
Drilling down, we find 45 of those 126 referrals to police did result in written warnings, and when the committee issued its findings, 81 cases were still being worked through. But that's a percentage of the total vote so small it has 2 zeros after the decimal point.
When I talk to the Electoral Commission about it, and when I read the report of the Electoral Committee on the 2014 election, what I find is that they don't think there's really a problem here that needs solving.
So far what's essentially a trust system has worked, and it encourages participation in a country where, unlike Australia, voting isn't compulsory. But Mei Chen says that doesn't mean it's not vulnerable, should people choose to exploit it.
In 2013, we had a census. In that census, 90,000 people said they spoke no English. Not English as an additional language, not English as a third or fourth language, not English badly, just spoke no English. All I'm saying is that you're then a person who's been here a long time, you're trying to get a lot of votes for a particular party, you say, well, look, there's a whole bunch of people who don't speak any English at all. I'm just going to go and say to them, well, why don't I just cast the vote for you, for all of you? I mean, we